The goal of this series is for you to hear from God how you can have total wellness in your life. That sounds like a good place to be. So I will be sharing from the lens of us being a three-part being: spirit, soul, body. That's like the lens that I look at life through, and I'm doing that more and more. So I don't have a formula. I don't have your answer, but guess who does? The Holy Spirit does. And so that's why my goal is that you need to hear. Maybe I'll talk about some things that trigger some things in you, but you need to be able to hear what the Holy Spirit has for you. And one person's healing or wellness is going to be different than another person's healing or wellness. So I'm just hoping to trigger some new ways and challenge your thinking. Here's like a really basic example. I won't ask you to raise your hand on this one, but if you've ever had like a rash on your skin, sometimes you start to think like, oh, I just need to put some, maybe go to the doctor, I need to put some cortisone on the rash, right? And that's all you're trying to do is get rid of the rash by putting this cream on it. And in your mind, in your box, that's the only way the rash is gonna go away, is put this cream on it. But sometimes the reason why somebody might have a rash is because of something that they've been eating, right? Something they've been putting into their body, and that's the outworking of it. Sometimes people get a rash, or like your neck gets all red or something, because you're way stressed out. And so I want to use that as an example because sometimes we get so focused on the problem and like this one thing we think is going to fix it, and we don't really look at other things that could be going on, like some things in our soul, or in this case, like maybe some things that you're eating or some products that you're putting on your face. And so I want you to think outside of the box. Can you agree to that? All right. So then I like to start out and say, well, why is this important? Why did you even choose to talk about this? How does this apply? And really, our nation, our earth, is in kind of a crisis. Life expectancy is going down. Suicide has become a top killer of young people. You don't have to turn on the TV for 5 minutes to hear about the opioid epidemic. The reason that darkness is increasing around us is because the church is becoming less and less impactful to push away the darkness, because we're sick in our spirits, we're sick in our souls, and we're sick in our bodies. So we have to be functioning at like full capacity if we want to change the world for Christ. If we want that end time harvest, we got to get ourselves in order in all three of those areas. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about. This series started stirring in me about a year ago. And I was battling an issue in my body, and I was drawn to this message that was called, I've Tried Everything. And that was how I felt. Have you ever felt that way? You're trying to deal with something and you feel like, I've tried everything. And the main text of the message was from John 5, and it was about the lame man at the pool of Bethesda. And you don't have to look it up yet because we're going to be reading it together. It will be up on the screens. But the next 4 weeks for us are going to look like this. Tonight's going to be kind of an introduction, kind of laying some groundwork, going through like our core text and scripture verse. And then the next 3 weeks are going to be 1 week about our spirit, 1 week about our soul, and 1 week about our body. And now don't check out on me there. This isn't going to be like about diet and exercise. I'm not telling you about calories and weightlifting or anything like that, okay? It will be different than what you think. So last year then, I started listening to that message called I've Tried Everything. And I started to think about the points that this pastor was making. And I started to go, wow, that would be a really great message to teach our clients at Living Free, or, use some of that and teach that on the Wednesday night. And so as I'm listening to it, that's what I'm thinking about is I want to teach this. So before I say more, we're just going to read it. And I've read it from a lot of different translations. The speaker read it from the Message translation, so that's what we're going to put up as the Message translation. All right. So this is John 5. It says, "Soon another feast came around, and Jesus was back in Jerusalem. Near the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there was a pool, in Hebrew called Bethesda, with 5 alcoves. Hundreds of sick people, blind, crippled, paralyzed, were in these alcoves. And one man had been an invalid there for 38 years. When Jesus saw him stretched out by the pool and knew how long he had been there, he said, 'Do you want to get well?' The sick man said, 'Sir, when the water is stirred, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool. By the time I get there, somebody else is already in.' Jesus said, 'Get up, take your bedroll, start walking.' The man was healed on the spot. He picked up his bedroll and he walked off." Okay, when I heard the pastor say these words, "Do you want to get well?" it was like fireworks going off on the inside of me. I don't know if you've had that experience maybe when you've heard something and maybe you've heard it a gazillion times, but for some reason it really resonates with you. And it just like, I just got excited and I just kind of started to ask the Lord, like, why? Like, why is this getting me all, revved up? What are you trying to show me? And so I started to think more about it, and then I started to go, well, why did Jesus ask him that question? Of course he wants to get well. 38 years of dealing with something, that's a really long time. And so I was just like hung up on this. I just kept going, why did he ask him that? Why did he ask him that? And so I started to think about maybe people that come through our Living Free program, and they'll say that they want to get sober, but sometimes by the end of it, you're like, but do they really? They seem to not really want to follow any, directions or have any accountability. And then for a lot of years, I worked for Weight Watchers, and so people over the years would come through Weight Watchers and they would say how they desperately wanted to be healthy, but yet they just refused to really change any of their life habits. So I just started to think, and then I started to read it in different translations, and then I started to try to put myself in his shoes and in Jesus' shoes, and I got myself excited that I had this great story, and I'm going to teach it the next opportunity that I have. And so I went back to my office like the next Monday or something, and I shared it with a couple of my coworkers, and then I just kind of put it on the shelf. I'm like, well, the next time I have an opportunity to teach, which I didn't know when that was, I think I'll talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to leave you on a cliffhanger there. I'm going to tell you the rest of my story at the end portion of the message. But I just want you to know that this message, this statement, triggered one of the most impacting, moments of time that I had with God. I like that it was Mother's Day weekend that Pastor Kristen and Pastor Jamie shared, and they were talking about different seasons and how sometimes you feel like you're in a winter. And I think I was in like a winter, and this was kind of what triggered my spring. So I'm going to tell you a bit more about that process for me. But before we do that, we're going to go back to the text and kind of lay some foundation for what we're going to be doing over the next couple weeks. So the title of this series is called, "Do You Want to Get Well?" And tonight, as I said, we'll be focused on kind of going through that text, the topic, and then we'll wrap up with the journey that I went on when I first heard that message. And so, as I said, I'm really big on spirit, soul, and body. And while we've all been taught about those things and like we know we're those three things, I feel like sometimes the body of Christ tries to separate them too much instead of really seeing how much they are connected and how together they are in making up who we are. So I was thinking about, I know this example's been used to represent the Trinity, but I'm going to use it for spirit, soul, and body. And think of like an egg or a hard-boiled egg. There's 3 parts, right? There's the shell and the white and the yolk, and they're all like 3 different parts, but yet they all have to be together for it to be an egg. And so they're different, they're identifiable, but they all need to be there to make the egg. And so Those will be as I said, the three things coming in the next few weeks. So, okay, let's go back to this text in John 5. And I'm going to kind of go through it verse by verse and make some commentary about it. And so it said, soon another feast came around and Jesus was back in Jerusalem. Near the sheep gate in Jerusalem, there was a pool in Hebrew called Bethesda with 5 alcoves. Pastor Jim has talked about this too. He said the name of the pool is said to be derived from the Hebrew and Aramaic language and means either house of mercy or house of grace. In both Hebrew and Aramaic, the word Hesda can also mean shame and disgrace. So it's like this dual meaning may have been thought appropriate since this location was seen as a place of disgrace due to the population of people there, but also a place of grace due to the granting of healing. It also mentioned that there are 5 alcoves, and I did a little studying on this, and I found a few more different things. First off, I didn't know this, that 5 is the number of grace. I thought that was interesting. And then another commentary said the number 5 represents the result of the physical world acting on the individual. It symbolizes the body, the senses, injury, and temptation. It also has a tie to nature and to overcoming physical constraints. I just thought that was interesting. There's so many deep little things like that in the Bible that if you sit and study and search, you just find what a perfect picture it is and how every little bit has meaning. Okay, we'll go on to it's around verse 3. It says, hundreds of sick people, blind, crippled, and paralyzed, were in these alcoves. So, imagine that. Try to visually imagine that. All these sick people, laying around, hundreds of them. And the visual I kind of got as I was thinking about this, we saw so many different news stories about, the homeless encampment in Minneapolis. Do you remember hearing about that and seeing the pictures just of, all the homeless people and, the tents? And I was just kind of, envisioning that. And it's we'll watch it on the news, but we don't really want to go down and, look at that. It's really hard to look at. It's hard to accept. It's hard to face that that's what's going on in our world. And I think about my husband and I were recently in Seattle, and we were walking around downtown, and there was a lot of homeless people. And I work with different people that have mental illness and maybe a population that's less desirable, but it's you'd be walking, and literally, there's somebody on the corner just talking nonstop to nobody. So you're okay, probably dealing with some mental illness and some things, and it's you really just walk by and ignore them. I didn't see that. I don't know what to do with that. I'm just going to pretend that person doesn't exist. And I mean, it's not you can engage with every homeless person maybe that you come across, but it was just sad how they've almost just become a part of the scenery, and you just kind of keep walking. But yet Jesus went to these places. He was there. He was there with all the hundreds of people that were laying around, sick, lame, mentally ill, talking to themselves. Who knows? Okay, so if you're using an NIV Bible, it's not likely that you will find an end to verse 3 or a verse 4, and there might be a note about it. My Message translation also didn't include verse 4. But if you go to the New King James Version, if you start reading with the end of verse 3, this is what it says. So your Bibles might not have this. It says, "In these lay a great multitude of sick people, blind, lame, and paralyzed, waiting for the moving of the water." Verse 4 says, "For an angel went down at a certain time into the pool and stirred up the water. Then whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was made well of whatever disease he had." So some translations have that. Some translations don't have a verse 4. And sometimes you don't even catch it when you're reading it. All of a sudden you're where did verse 4 go? So I wanted to learn about that. And the pool's healing power was a long-held pagan tradition and had nothing to do with God's mercy. It is proposed that because Jesus ignored it and didn't address it, that it confirmed that it was a pagan tradition. The other piece of it, I call it the more official reason that I read about, it says, what would be John 5, verse 4, the missing material, is not found in any of the earliest and most accurate manuscripts of the Gospel of John. Scholars who make a career of comparing manuscripts, textual critics and paleographers have discovered that in roughly 24 manuscripts, scribes would put asterisk marks at a verse to warn the next scribe who would copy that manuscript that the verse was likely not original. So to top it all off, then it says 4 of the last 5 Greek words of what would be John 5, verse 4, aren't found anywhere else as in John's writings. So they're basically saying he has never ever used these words in anything else that he wrote. So those things would suggest that John 5:4 doesn't really belong in the New Testament, which explains why a lot of Bibles have omitted it. So that was your Bible lesson for the day. That was new for me. I mean, I knew like it wasn't there. I didn't really know why, so I wanted to know why. All right, let's keep going. Verse 5 says, one man had been an invalid there for 38 years. So the translations use different terms. One used invalid, another uses lame, another uses infirmity. And if you look at the word that's used in the Strong's, it means feebleness of body or mind, or weakness or moral frailty. I thought that was interesting. We don't know for sure what he's been battling for 38 years, but we can't assume that it's just that he's lame in his legs. That's when you hear the word lame, is that what you think? Like I can't walk or limp or like lame in the legs. And so I think so many of us just read that verse and that's what you assume. But we can't assume that. It says feebleness of body or mind, a weakness or moral frailty. So it could be bigger than his legs. He could be battling depression. He could be battling low self-worth. Now this verse just got real, didn't it? Many of us have thought it was only that he was physically incapacitated. But you might say, ask yourself, have you ever felt so depressed you just slept and laid, you couldn't get out of bed? You could have been mistaken for a lame person. This definitely, to me, helps us see the story differently and maybe makes it a little bit more applicable. Most of us sitting here are able to, move our legs. And so we don't really know what he was battling, but we can't just assume he couldn't walk. Verse 6, when Jesus saw him stretched out by the pool and knew how long he had been there, he said, "Do you want to get well?" So other translations you've maybe heard say, "Wilt thou be made whole?" And the word for whole is translated as healthy, well in the body, sound and true in doctrine, total wellness. So once again, it's not just about his legs. It's not just about his physical body, while that's important, but total wellness, including his mind, including his spirit, about being sound and true in doctrine. I still was so hung up here for a long time. Jesus saw him, Jesus knew. And so when he says, "Do you want to get well?" I'm like, what was he what was he looking for? Why did he ask that question? And so, of course, as a counselor, all my counselor insight starts to try to read between the lines. And I'm like, well, does he want this man to search his heart to see if he really does or doesn't want to be well? Does he want him to say it out loud as an act of faith? Like, "Yes, Lord, I want to be well." Is he wanting to hear his list of excuses? Why did he ask him? I still don't know. I guess when I make it to heaven someday, that can be a question that I ask Jesus. Why'd you ask him that, right? Do you guys have questions for Jesus when you make it to heaven? Okay, I got a list of them too. So verse 7, it's, "The sick man said, 'Sir, when the water is stirred, I don't have anybody to put me in the pool. By the time I get there, somebody else is already in.'" So a few points on this verse. He replied to Jesus and he called him sir, which to me is an indication he doesn't really know or recognize who Jesus is. He does not know who's standing next to him. He calls him just sir, like you're just some guy and you're here to gawk. I don't know what he thinks. He calls him sir. He then went into, his excuses, which a lot of us like to call reasons. So he goes into his reasons that he's been in this condition for so long. And that's hard to admit. And if you've battled something for a long time, you probably got reasons, and they're hard to admit and share sometimes. And then the other thing I wanted to point out on that verse is he was so focused on the pool. When the water gets stirred, I can't get in there first. Somebody else always gets in. It was about the pool, the pool, the pool. He was so focused on the pool that he couldn't see that the living water was standing right next to him, right? So Jesus is kind of hey, I see that you couldn't get in the water, so the water is coming to you. Yeah. The water's coming to you. So I love that point about how he was just the only way I'm going to get my healing is to get in that pool, get in that pool, get in that pool. And we get so narrow-minded and so in a box. And so that's why I'm challenging you to try to get out of the box. Think outside of the box. Don't you even hear that in the business world? Okay, so we're going to, I want to expand a little bit on this kind of portion of Scripture. And we don't know exactly how long, this man has been there at the Pool of Bethesda, but it says he's had that condition for 38 years. We know that. So the Pool of Bethesda represented a place for him to be comfortable, a place to be around other people like him. And if you've ever been in a battle or dealt with something, there is some comfort in being around other people that are having the same challenge as you. There's benefit to that. I'm not saying that there isn't benefit to that. But for him, it was a place that allowed him to stay in his dysfunction and to stay in his sickness. And I think many of us are laying around our own pool of Bethesda, and like this man, we might be stuck in a 38-year-old problem. It might be in our spirit, it might be in our soul, it might be in our body, it might be in all three of those. And so we have to grasp this. We need to be whole in every sense of the word, because there are people in this world that need you and need you and need you and need you and need you, right? You don't have to walk too far to find a hurting person. Probably right in your own family, right in your own circle of friends. There's people everywhere that need you. And so we can't get to them if we're physically sick. We can't really do much if we're all messed up in our soul. And we can't do much if we're not right in our spirit. And so if we keep laying around the pool and we don't recognize that Jesus is right there next to us, how are we going to fulfill this great commission? So the Bible's clear, right? What does the enemy want to do? Kill, steal, destroy. And he will come at you from any angle that works. Any angle that works. We can't lay around waiting for this modern day version of the angel stirring the water to show up. With Jesus, we have to grab hold of wellness in every area of our life. And so I'll be giving you some more how-tos in our upcoming weeks. I'm kind of a how-to kind of girl. So we know that faith, right, is a part of our healing, but what does that really mean? Do we really know what that means? You need to use your faith to get your healing. We say it a lot, we read it a lot, but what does that really mean? So maybe instead of the word faith, we could change it to trust. Change it to the word trust. And sometimes that makes it easier to comprehend. Are you really trusting God that he will deliver what he promised? Because it's easy just to go, I have faith for this and I have faith for that. We all believe that the word is true, but do we really trust that he's going to do that for us? And so if you have kind of a hard time with that faith word, maybe replace it with the trust word. I also want to comment on this whole thing about reasons and excuses. So I want to challenge you that maybe if you've been battling a condition, spirit, soul, body, that you get gut level honest with yourself, which I had to do, and I'll tell you a bit more later. Get gut level honest with yourself and say, is there a payoff for me staying this way? Is there a payoff for me staying sick in my soul, sick in my body, sick in my spirit? Because if we weren't getting something out of it, we wouldn't choose to still be in it. And I know it's more complicated than that, but it's something we still need to ask ourselves. And I know it sounds harsh, but we know God's will is what? For us to be healed and for us to be well. Someday I'm going to get a rah-rah cheerleader message, but we know his word always says he gives us a way of escape. We know his word says that he wants us well and wants us healed. So I think like this man in John 5, that we may not always be seeing the big picture or be willing to do what it takes. And we have to want to get well, right? God won't force it on us. He doesn't force anything on us. He doesn't force himself on us. There's nothing he forces on us. So there is a part that we play that we have to want that and then, engage our trust, engage our faith. So this, in my mind, is really the question Jesus was asking. This is my best guess, but I'll still ask him when I get there to heaven. Really the question he's asking is, do you want this? And without your permission, I can't do this. And I just think that's interesting. Are there things we're waiting on that we haven't really given God permission to do? Like, well, you can fix up this part of my heart, but oh no, don't go over here. No, we don't talk about that. We don't talk about that secret. We don't talk about that addiction. We kind of just allow him into the safe parts. I found an interesting article. It was called The 25 Payoffs for Being Sick. And so in my definition of sick, I want you to think about all three parts. So here's a few that stuck out to me. Don't take what I'm saying and make this a doctrine. You guys always have to have balance. So I'm just telling you, it's from an article. There were some things I thought that could challenge our thinking, but don't make these things a doctrine. Okay, first payoff for being sick. I don't have to have any responsibility. If I'm sick, I don't have to take out the garbage. I don't have to get a job. I don't have to earn a living. I don't have to get up in the morning or be responsible for what God's called me to do. I'm too sick to do this. I'm too depressed to do that. I'm too tired to do this, or that. That can be a payoff. I can just coast a little bit. These are going to be hard. I know that. No commitments. You don't have to commit yourself to good health habits like exercise or devotional time or taking care of your emotions. It's easier just to stay stuck in them so you don't have to commit to change, because change takes effort, right? Change is hard. It's not always fun. Sympathy. Some people may choose to stay in a dysfunction or a sickness because of sympathy. Is that the only way you get attention? Oh, back in the hospital. And what happens when that happens? Oh, everybody's calling me, everybody's texting me, everybody's showing up to visit me. For some people, it could be suicidal threats. Oh, that's when everybody will come back around and tell me that they love me. Maybe we stay stuck in a dysfunction or a sickness because we get sympathy. Guilt. You can use illness as a way to manipulate other people. Well, they have to come and visit. They got to stay married to me because I'm sick. And they neglect their own needs because you are so unwell. So you can guilt people into doing what you want. And if I'm sick, if I'm not well, if I'm dysfunctional, you'll do what I really want you to do. Which leads us to the big one called control. Control. Your needs are so specific that you have to control everything about your environment. You decide everything. It's all about what you need. And a whole lot of us have issues with control and we don't even know it. And when you think about it, control is really the opposite of trust or faith, right? I think it's one of the biggest things that gets in the way of us becoming well. Control makes us feel better. That's why we do it. It's super scary to surrender to God and just go, I don't know what you're going to do or how you're going to do it, but I surrender, right? That's really scary for all of us. And so it's much easier to control things because it makes us feel better. That's why we do it. And sometimes our urge to control things outweighs our ability to use our faith and to trust God. And so, control. That's probably I would like to do another sermon on that one. Okay, another payoff for staying sick maybe is we don't have to face things. You can't possibly address the real issues in your life because you're too busy being sick or dysfunctional. So that becomes your entire focus. Another one would be identity. You become your illness. You become your dysfunction. I'm not minimizing that we have things and that we go through things. I get that. But we tell our people back at Living Free, you don't have to walk around for 40 years and say, my name is John and I'm an alcoholic. That's something that you did, but that's not who you are. The same power that rose Jesus from the dead resides in you. And so our sickness or our dysfunction doesn't have to become our identity. We don't want to be our illness. Some of you are a card-carrying member of the illness. That's, hi, my name's such and such, and I have this, and I have this, and I have this, and I have that, and you've forgotten about where are we supposed to get our identity? From Christ. And so we don't want to be staying in sickness or dysfunction so we can feel that we have a purpose and we have value. We have to get that from Christ. Another payoff is avoidance of intimacy. How could you possibly form a relationship when you feel so bad? Has anybody ever had a conflict in a relationship? Would anybody agree that sometimes relationships are really hard? Parenting is hard, marriage is hard. Relationships have challenges. And it requires us to grow, and it requires us to invest time in communication and conflict resolution. And so we can avoid intimacy by staying in our dysfunction or our sickness. The last one I'm going to share, I'm not going through, we think I'm going to go through all 25, and you're like, oh gosh, we're never getting out of here. No. The last one I wanted to share was that we don't have to change or grow up, because being sick or dysfunctional keeps us stuck. And sometimes other people make decisions for us. They'll, oh, you're going to pay my bills, and they're going to make all the plans. And so if we're always so sick that other people have to be doing everything for us, we don't have any responsibility. We don't have to change. We don't have to grow up. Ouchie. Jesus' question was, do you want to get well? And not, do you want to feel better? Do you want to get well, not do you want to feel better? Some of us just want to feel better and not really address the reasons or the excuses that I just discussed. And so those patterns of behavior have become functional for you. Even though there's some sickness, it's like, oh, but it's familiar and it kind of works for me. So I know it's easier sometimes just to do things to feel better. Like, okay, I'm going to go to the doctor, I'm going to go to the psychiatrist, I'm going to take this medication so I can feel better, and maybe instead of getting at some of the root issues. Okay, no, I'm not against doctors or therapists or counselors or anything like that. God uses them for many of us as a part of the healing process. But you need to ask yourself, why am I doing this? Is God directing me to do this, or am I just trying to feel better and avoid doing what I need to do so I can be healed and so I can be well? I know that's tough stuff. Let's hurry up and just move on. All right, verses 8 and 9, Jesus said, "Get up, take your bedroll, start walking." And the man was healed on the spot. He picked up his bedroll and he walked off. So he told the man 3 things that he needed to do, and he was healed on the spot. Notice Jesus didn't lay hands on him. He didn't touch him. He didn't say a long prayer or anything. He told him 3 things that he had to do. And so we do have some responsibility in the condition of our life. And yes, I believe in miracles. And yes, I believe that things can change like that in the presence of God. But sometimes we are experiencing a miracle, but maybe it doesn't happen in a 30-second period. Maybe it happens over a month or a week or a year. I don't know. Most of us need to go through healing, which is a process because it allows us to change the things once and for all that have kept us stuck. So I'm going to be referring back to those 3 steps over the next 3 weeks also. So the first thing he says is get up. Can you say that? Get up. Get up. He says get up. And I looked up that word, and it means to rise or awaken. Rise or awaken. So you need to be honest with yourself. You need to let the Lord show you what you've been missing. You need to awaken to the fact that he's standing right next to you, and you have to admit what's really going on. So having this awakening is the first step, and it requires an open mind and not putting God in a box of how you think your healing is going to come. So you need to ask him, but then you have to listen. He's not trying to hide it from you. We make everything so complicated, don't we? So he says, get up. So that it's kind of is like, wake up and smell the coffee. Awaken to like, what is the state you are in? It says, rise, awaken. The second thing he says is take up. Say, take up. Take up. And that word means to loose or to put away. I was kind of surprised about that. That's not really how you tend to read the verse. To loose or put away. And so I thought of it just as like the literal, like, right, picking up of the bed. So if we've had this awakening, the first thing we had to do. Now the second thing he says is we need to get rid of or loose or put something away. So in my mind, taking up the bed means putting away the thing that you've been laying on that's keeping you comfortable in the current state that you are in. I better say that again. It means putting away the thing that you've been laying on that's keeping you comfortable in the current state you're in. That's usually why we don't like to change, right? It's uncomfortable. It's not fun. So if we have to put some things away, it might mean, gosh, I got to put away the sugar. It might mean, gosh, I got to give up this pride. It might mean I have to get rid of this self-pity. It might mean I have to put away toxic people from my life, even if they're a part of my family. This is the hard part. This is the action part, and this happens to be our part. So we got to put some things away. God will tell you what those things are. You just got to listen. The third thing he said was start walking. So say that one. Start walking. Start walking. So when I look that word up, that word means to live or to go. To live or to go. So this is about moving forward and not giving in to the temptation to go back to the comfortable place, to put your bed back down and lay, right? It's like, I think of it this way. It's like when you lose weight, you should get rid of all your fat clothes. Because if you keep them around, it's an open door to going back to that old state, right? That's the best example I can think of. So it might mean This means removing contacts in your phone, maybe if they're a drug dealer. It could be getting contacts of using friends or bridges back to old ways. Just getting rid of anything that's going to bring you back to the old. We want to go forward. We want to walk. It says to live and to go. Many of us are physically alive, but are we really living? Are we really going somewhere? Or are we stuck on the bed? So it's interesting, when he did those things, he was healed. Okay, I'm going to pick back up and tell you the story about me. We're going back to the cliffhanger and like how this all played out in my own life. So part of the story also will be revisited over the next few weeks. So I left off telling you that I listened to this sermon called I've Tried Everything. And that when I heard the story about the man at the pool of Bethesda, and when Jesus said, do you want to get well? Like I just had this something on the inside of me. So during this time, so I probably listened, I'm going to guess, to the sermon maybe like last April. And I had already been dealing with, the physical ailment I had been dealing with was plantar fasciitis in both of my feet. Has anybody ever had that? Raise your hand. Okay, if you've had it, you know. If you haven't, just plan not to get it, okay? And so it kind of came suddenly, it kind of came out of the blue, and basically the result of it is you have a whole bunch of pain. For me, it was mostly in my heels, and especially if you got out of bed in the morning, you would just like step and it was just like pain. So I'm like an active person. I like to kickbox. I like to go on the treadmill. I'd run some 5Ks, and so like to have pain in my feet on a regular basis was really interrupting my life. I was always like the fast walker that people couldn't keep up with, and now all of a sudden it's hard just to do like the day. It was just really, really icky. And so, of course, I started to follow all the suggestions, and anybody who's ever had this situation, they tell you there are 10 things that they did. And so I rolled my foot on the water bottle and the golf balls, and you ice it and you stretch it. And I got chiropractic adjustments and made sure my hips were in line and my knees were in line. And that I started to do all the stuff like physically that you're supposed to do to help your feet heal from this problem. And so I had to like modify so much of my routine. It was like really impacting to my life. Now I realized this isn't like cancer. It wasn't going to kill me, but it was very much impacting my life. To not be able to participate even in like, my family, we're going on vacation and we want to go on a hike or something, and it's like, well, there's Ma in the back with her special shoes on, coming up the rear. Wasn't fun. So my right foot actually healed probably within a couple months from doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so I'm like, yes, this is working. And so I just assumed that my left foot, because I was doing the same thing on the left foot, that the healing would just come shortly thereafter. Well, like that didn't happen. I mean, it was several months later after that, like none of it was working. I've spent all this money on really expensive shoes and this insert and that insert and like done everything. You liked the bill for the shoes, didn't you? So I finally, stubborn me, did go to the podiatrist. Okay. He doesn't say much other than like you can do this or you can do this, and so my option was physical therapy. So I went and did some physical therapy for, I don't know, it was maybe like 12 to 15 sessions or something. And then I had minimal improvement, not a lot, and I did everything they told me to do, all the exercises as many times as I was supposed to do. And so they had me do something else that's a little more drastic, and one was called I think, is it called the Graston technique? Graston. And they take like these metal things and they like scrape like on your arch. And then I also had something called dry needling, where they basically take like an acupuncture needle and they put it in like the arch and the heel of your foot and they like move it around. I know, are you getting squirmy? And so basically, because my situation in my left foot was so chronic, what they try to do is almost like re-inflame it and trick your foot into thinking it's a brand new issue, so your body will go to work full-time healing it. Did not look forward to those sessions. It helped a little, still not gone. So, I probably was like a year into this. I'm just like frustrated, it's tiring, it's just impacting my life. And so it was an early Sunday morning in last June, and I got a text message from my friend, my other Heather friend sitting over here. We sometimes text on the weekends, and I'm usually the like, oh my gosh, I got the laundry going and the dishes going, and I've done this, this, and this. And she's like, I'm sitting here, like enjoying the presence of the Lord. And I'm just like, why can't I be more like her? I don't know. You're so good at that, Heather. So I get this text on my phone from Heather, and it has a link to an article that says, Healing Your Feet, Emotional Causes of Plantar Fasciitis. So I'm just kind of coming around to this whole like spirit, soul, body, mind, body connection, and she knows I'm like fascinated with that stuff, and I know she wouldn't send me anything weird or whatever. And so I printed the article out. I want to read you just a couple highlighted items from the article, because I started to read it, and then I start asking her all these questions. I don't know, we were probably texting for like an hour or something. Everybody in my family's asleep, and I'm in this deep texting conversation. And so it says, your emotions can be a primary cause of plantar fasciitis and the key to unlocking the healing of your feet. So once again, don't take this and go into a ditch and go, well, my feet hurt too, so I must have emotional problems or whatever. Everybody's healings are different. Everybody's issues are different. You have to let the Lord reveal to you what's going on with you and what you need to do. So don't take what I'm saying and try to make that a formula for you, okay? So this is the first line on the article. Are you the shock absorber for your family and friends? And I'm like, I keep reading. It says, the plantar fascia ligament is a fibrous tissue that connects the heel bone to the toes while supporting the arch of the foot. It serves as the shock absorber for our feet by holding structures together and keeping them strong. So if you didn't know what it was, now you do. I thought that was really interesting. It's the shock absorber. And it says, individuals who have plantar fasciitis are prone to absorb the slings and arrows of the world around them. They tend to feel responsible for holding everything together. They take on the job of keeping their family, friends, and others around them stable. So I start asking Heather, do I do this? Do you see this in me? Well, what about this? And she'd give me her like honest answers. And not 100% of this article applied to me. But it was one of those things when I started to read it, like the Lord just kind of downloaded it into me. And like I knew that some of these things were, as they say, reading your mail. Yeah, okay. A couple more things I want to read. It says, think of the stress from being the support for others, the shock absorber, while not getting adequate support for yourself. And I started to think about my life and the roles that I play. And while some of that is normal, I'm a mom, so sometimes you're doing that. I'm a pastor in charge of a department, and so there's sometimes that you're having to absorb the shock just of what's going on with staff relationships or whatever it might be. And I'm like, and where am I getting adequate support for myself? I started to ask myself that. Then it went specifically into the right foot and the left foot. So my right foot was good. Left foot's still a problem. It says for the left foot, It's about being handicapped with vulnerability issues, unwilling to receive support, and refusing to allow others to be caretakers. And so I remember saying to Heather, I'm like, well, I don't have a problem being vulnerable with others. You can probably tell that. I'll tell you my faults, and I'll tell you what's going on in my life. But I have a hard time being vulnerable with others to say, like, hey, I need help, or hey, I could use some support here. And so I realized that I was a Martha, first of all. And if you read about Mary and Martha right at the feet of Jesus, what's Martha doing? Okay, I'm Martha on a Sunday morning, like unloading the dishwasher, getting the laundry going, getting my meal prep done for the week. And Heather is Mary at the feet of Jesus. And I just realized how, like, I didn't start my day, in a sense, connecting first with God. It was more about my to-do list. And then I was reminded about this whole thing about I don't like to ask for help. And I'm like, okay, well, where's that come from? Am I being prideful? Like, what's that about? And the Lord reminded me of a time I was probably a junior in high school, and I was always like a responsible kid. I've had a job since I was 14. I didn't get in trouble in school. I was on student council. I was like a good girl. It makes no sense why I work at Living Free at all. And I remember there was a time I paid my own car insurance. I bought my own car. Like, I was taught good financial stuff by my parents, but there was a time I think I needed $75 for my car insurance or something. And I had to ask one of my parents if they would be willing to help me with that $75. And oh my gosh, did I get an earful and a mouthful, and it was really not connected with me at all. It was about their issues, being divorced parents and, alimony and child support and all that kind of stuff that had nothing to do with me. But I remember just crying and like telling myself, I will never, ever, 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 ever ask anybody for help again. Ever. Ever. And so that's translated into my adult life. Even though I have staff that are there and very willing to help me and want to help me, sometimes I'd be like, well, I'll just do it myself because I can and I don't want to bother you, or I'd have a hard time delegating certain tasks because I didn't want to be the type of boss that was like, I'm up here and I'm not good enough to do this task down here. It was important for me to be willing to do any task. And so, anyway, I continued to contemplate all this. We stopped texting for a bit, and I decided to go take a shower. And all of a sudden, I'm in the shower, and I hear like the Lord say, do you want to get well? And I'm like, oh yeah, that was a great sermon, right? I can't wait to put that together in a sermon and teach it on a Wednesday night. And I just start like rehearsing all the things I heard in the sermon, blah, 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 blah. Yeah, Lord, thanks for reminding me of that. Then I hear it again. Do you want to get well? Yeah, that's going to be a great sermon, Lord. I can't wait to teach that, right? Seriously, then like a third time, do you want to get well? I'm like, why do you keep saying that to me? And he's like, because I'm saying it to you. I don't want you to go teach a sermon. I'm asking you that question. So for some reason, he talks to me a lot in the shower. I don't know. So I start bawling. I'm bawling in the shower, just bawling, and like, oh my gosh, And I had this realization that all my time, usually that I was spending with the Lord, I would read books about being a better wife, books about being a better mom, books about being a better leader, books about chemical dependency. And it was all about, I'm going to take this in and I'm going to teach this out. And I'm going to take this in and I'm going to teach that to this group. And I'm going to take this in and I'm going to give it out there. And I realized I've lost this because everything's just gone like through me and out, through me and out. And I had this realization that I had, in a sense, forgotten my first love. that I didn't read books or anything that were just about me and my relationship with God. So I decided to go out on the porch and sit. It was June. It was really rainy. And I just sat on the porch, and I had like worship music playing on my phone. And I just wanted to like listen, like, okay, Lord, just lay it on me. What else do I need to know? And literally, I'm sitting on the porch, and I see like a weed in the landscaping, and it takes everything in me not to get up and go pick this stupid weed and be the Martha that I am. And so I sat there, I didn't pick the weed. And I watched the rain, and I watched the rain fall on the grass, and I watched the rain fall on the leaves, and the Lord was just like using that to go, look at the grass and look at the leaves. Like, are they worried about all the busyness and the tasks? They're just there enjoying and soaking in the rain. And so then I'm sitting there, and I hear this, go out in the rain. I'm like, no. I just did my hair, I just got out of the shower, and I kind of hear him say, go out and stand in the rain. Just like the grass is taking in this rain, I want you to do that. So it's, I don't know, maybe 9 o'clock in the morning, 9:30, I don't know. I go out in the middle of my front yard, still worship music playing, and I like go like this. And it's raining, and I'll be honest, I'm like, who's looking at me? Are the neighbors looking out the window? Are the cars driving by? And I couldn't shut off my brain, so I had to go around the house to the backyard. In the meantime, everybody, as far as I know, is still sleeping in my house, or I think you were up and downstairs. Like, nobody knows what's going on with me, just Heather. I think I texted her some stuff in the meantime. So I went in the backyard, and I just, probably for 10 minutes, got soaked in the rain, in my clothes, with my hair, and I just listened to this worship music, and I cried, and I just let the Lord, like, soak me. And in a sense, kind of repented, like, I'm so sorry, Lord. Like, why has it taken me this long to figure this out? Has anybody else been a little bit slow sometimes? Okay. So I end up just having this moment with him. And I made this commitment at that time to change, and that I would regain a more meaningful devotional life. And I'm happy to say that it's been a year, and I've stuck with that. I made efforts to stop being the shock absorber in my family, sometimes with my staff. It's hard because, as I said, it's kind of the natural role of a mom sometimes to keep peace in the house, and as the boss to keep peace in the office. But there's things I've just had to say, like, work it out. I'm not going to be a part of this. I also had to get some balance in my life, and I had to loose or let go of some things even though they were good. And there's a lot of us that are doing a lot of good things, but we're too stinking busy. We'll be talking about that too, week 4. So I was working part-time for Weight Watchers. I quit Weight Watchers. I was also a Tupperware lady, and so I like totally reduced my Tupperware business. I was a little bit obsessive about working out and fitness, and so I like found some balance in there. And those were some things that I had to change. And I'm happy to say now that my feet are both completely healed, and that I can jog and I can jump, and I'm not limited, and so God is good. But I was so focused for a long time on like, roll it on the bottle, stretch it, I had the box. It has to be a physical thing I need to change in order to change this physical problem. And I had to look at it from a bigger perspective, that I'm a 3-part being, and that there were other things that I needed to look at. And that's when my healing came. I addressed all 3 areas. I still am mindful, I still wear supportive shoes, and I still am smart, so my foot doesn't revert back to that pain. But I just wanted to share that story because sometimes it's bigger than just the physical exercise or the thing that we're prescribed to do. I had to do things in all 3 areas for it to happen. I had to awaken to my current state of life, which was, oh my gosh, where are we at, me and God? I had to put things away. I had to lose things that I loved, and then I had to go and start living differently. I had to do those 3 things that the man at the pool of Bethesda did. And so I'm encouraging you to look at this 3-step process and say, hey, I'm going to make this a regular part of my living. I don't want to be in a box and stuck with something for 38 years. God was trying to speak to me directly first, like several months earlier, but all I could hear was, oh yeah, I'm going to go preach that sometime. And so he had to kind of, that's when I heard that phrase the first time, do you want to get well? And it's like my spirit responded, but I didn't recognize that it was for me. I thought it was just all for you. And while it is now, it's still for me, but I wasn't listening. And so he had to go to that next level of communication, which is when he sends somebody across our path or our friends to send us text messages on Sunday mornings and say, hey, what do you think about this? And so if you don't listen, God will he'll try to get you to listen. He'll send another person, then maybe he'll send another person. So hopefully you can catch on a little bit quicker than I did. So my question to you is, are you listening? Do you want to get well?